in today? Showed up for this stuff.
The content is being sent to YouTube. That's muted. Madam Chair, we're good to go.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm going to call to order the meeting for the City Council Rules Committee for October 28th, 2024. And members present are Stapleton. Gwen.
Hi.
Right. Thank you. We are here to have a discussion with Moss Adams about the city code related to neighborhood associations. We have Annie Rose with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me here today. Shall we dive right in?
Yes, please.
Fantastic. Okay, I have a short presentation as per usual with mostly discussion questions for you all. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Some of this may be review, so I will go rather quickly, but please stop me if there are any questions as I go through as well. So just a little bit of background context on this conversation. As you may remember, we went through a governance assessment where we were looking at the city charter as well as at governance groups, meaning your commissions, your boards, committees, as well as the neighborhood associations, and looking at all of these elements really to think about how can they be made more efficient, more effective for the city as a whole. The concept of equity is a piece of this conversation as well. So that assessment was completed earlier this year. We are now in the phase of doing some implementation support work for this. And there are 3 streams of work for that. One that is focused on the governance groups, one focused on neighborhood associations, and the third on the city charter. So for today's conversation, I'm going to highlight that middle box for you. The idea here is that we're looking at the analysis and the recommendations that were related to the neighborhood associations, bringing forward some ideas to this group for potential code changes, process changes, so that eventually those can be brought to full city council as well. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, is some of those ideas for initial changes. We want to talk through the potential updates that would be made in relation to neighborhood associations, but this would not be the only time you all would have this conversation. We want to talk through it today, then we want to bring back those proposed ideas to the neighborhood association chairs meeting for further discussion in January, so that we make sure that we are including those groups in this conversation actively. So that would happen in January before, again, final recommendations being brought forward to this committee before being brought to city council. So today we are just discussing, but we wanted to get your initial feedback on some of the proposed changes. As you all know, neighborhood associations play a very important role for the city, for the neighborhoods that they represent. They are independent organizations, but they are supported by the city and play this critical and unique role. Therefore, the city has an interest in supporting these groups. However, the neighborhood program coordinator role, the city used to have significantly more staff in this area. You're now down to 1 coordinator role in this position, and the workload right now is pretty unsustainable. And that has absolutely nothing to do with the individual that is serving in that position. She is absolutely fantastic, but just the amount of work that is currently in that area is unsustainable at this time. So we're really trying to think about what changes could we make that will enable that workload to be sustainable, but also to set the neighborhood associations up for success. Again, background, there are 2 areas within the Salem Revised Code, one that really outlines the responsibility of the neighborhood associations, another that set the standards and activities that the city requires of those groups to be formally recognized. So those would be some of the areas that we are looking at for potential changes. So, potential code updates. There are a couple pieces that were suggested as part of the assessment or subsequent conversations. We've been working with staff that support the neighborhood associations to develop this list, but we can discuss each one in brief. The first one would be making a change to require that all neighborhood associations develop and adopt a code of conduct to make sure that meetings are held to a professional level. The idea here would be that the city would develop a baseline code of conduct that would be required, but could then be adapted by each neighborhood association group. The second would be requiring the neighborhood associations maintain their own meeting agendas and do all of the work related to developing those agendas and getting them submitted to the city. The city would still, post those agendas to the city website, that type of thing. But in terms of the actual management of the agenda, that would live with the neighborhood associations rather than with that neighborhood program coordinator role. That would be the same for meeting minutes. So making sure that those meeting minutes are fully managed by the neighborhood association. Member rosters, that they would primarily be managed by the neighborhood association as well, while the city might maintain their own member roster as well. The primary management of that would be at the neighborhood association level. Meeting locations, this would be requiring that neighborhood association meetings take place within an ADA compliant space that is accessible, a nonpartisan space, a non-religiously affiliated space, or in an online. So that would just be clarifying those meeting location options. And then finally saying basically, if any of these items are not met, this could trigger the process that is currently in code where the neighborhood association, if they don't come into compliance with this, could lose their recognition from the city. So this would be the consequences side of some of these items. So that is a very high level of the overview of the changes that are being discussed. So I'd love to hear if you have questions or thoughts on any of these items.
Yeah, Chris, Mayor Hoy.
Yeah, so thank you, Andy Rose. I have a concern about the meeting location bullet. Just because while I agree completely with it, I don't know that it's feasible any longer, given that our schools kicked us out. And in a lot of neighborhoods, there aren't other locations other than churches. I know, out here, let's see, there are three in my ward. There are three, and two of them meet at religiously affiliated spaces. And I know in a lot of other places they do as well. So I'm not sure if we don't offer a means to comply with that. I'm not sure how we can require it. The other issue is about online. We do offer a rotating laptop, but it's I don't know if you've ever attended one of our neighborhood meetings remotely, but it's not a satisfying experience. Let me just say that.
Great, thank you. So both the question of, is it even feasible to ask for this given the actual resources, locations available within the community, and then clarifying whether or not online is even an option that we think is a good option. Okay.
Unless we're willing to pay, which is, there are some places that you could pay to meet, but our neighborhood associations don't have that kind of budget.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Annie, we have a question in the room, but I also would like to know, do we know how many neighborhood associations meet in religious affiliated locations?
I don't know that for
Okay.
sure.
All right.
South Gateway, both of mine do. I've only got two, but both of them are in churches. Yeah.
One of mine does. One of Ward 3 meets in a church,
Yeah, and
Morningside.
only one of mine meets in an affiliate. I mean, they meet at Broadway in the conference room, so it's not, it's an affiliated location, but it's not like a church. But anyway, you had a question?
No, I had a comment. I was just gonna say, I don't think we should tell them where they can meet.
I would stress the ADA compliant piece of it, which I think most of the publicly accessible spaces like churches would need to meet, but.
I can totally agree with the ADA compliant.
I mean, this is tricky. Like, I can imagine a scenario where, something could meet criteria for being considered a religious space, but also would be anathema to like many of the stances that city council's already taken. So that would be like, I don't know how to resolve that. Like if there's what a broad consensus would say, that's discriminatory. They're bad actors, but they claim the protections of a religion. I get the rub, but like, I don't know how to, practically speaking, I think most of the churches are, at least on face value, accepting, and people can come in that aren't members. And there's no, I don't know, arm twisting. And there's just a lack of places to meet that are public.
I want to add something to this. I'm not sure quite how to say it. I totally get what my colleagues are saying about this. What I want to say is that I wonder if there's a way that we can put in something that says that the location Here's the thing, there's a lot of people who meet in churches or go in and out of churches who don't have any issue with churches, and they don't necessarily recognize that there are people in our community that is a non-starter for. And I just want to say that here, because I think a lot of people who are comfortable in those spaces, I think I'm repeating myself, but are just kind of oblivious to the people who have panic attacks when they walk into a space like this. And that would really make it so that those people could not participate in this process. And if this is, I mean, I don't know, these are so quasi weird, right? It's not like a city thing. I mean, I guess I'm looking at the attorney to kind of clarify this for me.
I guess from my perspective, it's almost like answering it in the negative, but we wouldn't be violating laws by allowing them to do it in churches.
Yeah,
Okay, and we wouldn't be violating laws if we require them to not meet in churches.
No,
So either way,
we could say, no, you can't meet in
yeah.
religiously affiliated space.
I guess what I'm saying is I totally understand, and we don't want to add any more hardships to neighborhood associations. They already have an uphill battle. I get that. And I'm just wondering if there could be a sentence in here that says that the location be, considerate of, whatever, to kind of help highlight the issue or bring attention to it. I don't know, what were you gonna say, Dan?
Nothing on that. No, I understand the point you're making. I'm not sure how to articulate that
Yes,
standard.
Me
but
neither.
Something that Annie and I could talk about. What I was gonna say though is, Gail Freeman and Risk, worked hard to, find, an insurance option for neighborhood associations that's dirt cheap, that Risk is covering. So the big sticking point with school districts, not allowing neighborhood associations to use their facilities was you have to have insurance.
Yeah.
We have a program now where neighborhood associations can fill out a form, easy peasy. We pay the minimal cost for the insurance and it covers them. So as far as the district is concerned, that's available, I believe,
Very cool.
to neighborhood associations now, at no cost to the neighborhood association. Other than,
And there's no cost for the room rental anymore?
well, that's the other question. No cost as far as the insurance goes. I don't know if the school district would be charging room fees or not.
I have a follow-up comment question. So I like the idea of doing things that don't have a huge amount of cost, and that don't create a barrier for entry, but like incentivize good things. I mean, I think that like the biggest neighborhood association Ward 3 is Morningside, and they meet at the Methodist Church, which is, open and accessible and meets all the ADA stuff. But we also have a hybrid. So like people can attend on Zoom as another backup option. So I don't know if there's a way to look at like supporting that doesn't bankrupt us in terms of like giving them credit for their communication fund or whatever. Because there's already some things for documenting volunteers' hours to max out your, the amount of in-kind money they get, or not in-kind money, but they get some kind of funds to utilize for their annual meeting or other actions throughout the year. So I would just like to encourage the good actors that are already making theirs available online to increase the flexibility that people have to access that important hub of communication, rather than creating like a hard and fast barrier. And I was thinking the same thing in terms of like, how do we, if it's easier to go back into the schools and there was, in a magic world now that we have insurance, no cost to it, I think that would be a preference. I mean, the Fayrite used to meet exclusively in the Fayrite Neighborhood Association, the Fayrite undergraduate, the grade school there. So it would be nice if those kind of, patterns were once again available for people to meet up in.
So what I'm hearing then is, well, and let me ask this group. It sounds like the ADA compliance and accessibility piece, there's no problem with that piece. The nonpartisan piece, there's no problem with that. The issue with the non-religiously affiliated space is practically whether or not that's a reasonable thing to require of people. So that might be something where we might encourage but not require, recognizing that the goal of all of this is to make sure that the space is as accessible as possible so that you could bring in as many members of the neighborhood as possible. Is that a fair summary of where we're headed so far? Any other main pieces that I've missed there?
I'm also okay with the nonpartisan. I think that's important.
Mhm.
Like, I think it's gotta be, accessible to the entirety of the political spectrum.
Yeah, it would not be appropriate for like Can Do to meet at the Marion County Dems office.
No, I don't think
Right,
so.
it's not okay. Okay, is everybody comfortable moving forward with that? Of course, this isn't the last time we get to have input on this, so see kind of what you guys take away and see the updated version later.
Would there be a way to find out what the school district would charge, like for meeting space, and if that's a viable option?
Sure, I can check with Irma on that.
Thank you, Dana. Okay, Annie, I think we're ready to move on.
Great. All right. It sounds like there's no other discussion on any of the other points on this page, correct? We're feeling good about the rest of it?
Question on the recognition part on the bottom.
Yeah.
So 2 written warnings will be issued by the city. Who is the city? Is that the person like the Irmas of the world?
Yeah, it would be the neighborhood program coordinator would probably lead that work.
Okay.
She's too nice. It needs to be someone else.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading this in
You
here.
got Gretchen do it. She's so mean.
Okay.
The
Well-
idea here, though, is just to give that position more fallback to make sure that the neighborhood associations are taking full ownership and responsibility over some of these pieces. So hopefully it wouldn't come up, but it's nice to have it built in.
Annie, I have a question here. So how would we learn that somebody is not following the rules? Does that make sense? I mean, I feel like is now Irma like out making sure everybody's doing the thing, or is there a way for the public to issue or file a complaint against a neighborhood association?
I think someone could let Irma know, or another member of city staff obviously know, if there was something coming up. I think more likely what would happen in a scenario like this was if, for example, the meeting minutes were not being submitted on a timely basis or not being submitted at all. That would be the trigger point to say, okay, that's the group that we need to work with and communicate to make sure that they're clear on the expectations and they know what they need to fulfill in order to be a recognized neighborhood association.
In practice, the way those things usually come about is someone complains to Irma, or they use the dedicated city complaint email, which is city council.
Okay.
city.net.
Thanks. Yes, they do. Okay. Anything else? Anybody? No. Okay, go ahead, Annie.
All right. Well, then I only have one other piece for you, which is to note that there's another piece of the code that talks about the support that the city will provide to the neighborhood associations if resources are available. So because it already says if resources are available, there's nothing that we're recommending changing to this part of the code, but we did want to at least flag for you all that there are some process changes that we are considering putting in place, again, to help with some of the workload elements for that neighborhood association role or program, neighborhood program coordinator role, excuse me. So these would be some of the changes. And again, this would not influence anything that's at the code level. This would be more something that would be communicated from the city to the neighborhood associations as a bit of a shift in how we're currently doing business. But the concept here, neighborhood associations would really lead their own member recruitment efforts. Certain groups have really heavily relied on the city in the past for this work. So really saying this is something that the neighborhood associations need to own. The city would provide and record a standardized onboarding training, but probably limit that to one onboarding training rather than providing multiple, not providing additional financial assistance grants at this time, and then really clarifying that we're only going to be providing some of these other support activities if staff capacity allows, like help finding meeting locations, translation of materials into Spanish, assistance with special projects, those types of things. So again, nothing here is stuff that would need to change in the code, but we wanted to highlight this because this is part of the conversation that will be happening with the neighborhood associations too.
Thank you, Annie. Chris?
I'm not sure why the one about the city will not provide additional financial assistance grants at this time is necessary. Like, what about if we change, what if something changes and we decide to do that? Why would we want this in the documentation? To me, it doesn't help anything and it only makes things more difficult later.
I mean, I guess I have a follow-up question on that. Excellent, point of conversation. Is it because we're trying to communicate the financial shortfall that we have?
Part of this is communicating basically the level of support that you may have received in the past. As we move forward, we're going to have to make some changes to that. So this is part of communicating that message there. But absolutely hear what you're saying in terms of, we don't need to over communicate or box ourselves in here.
I think we should say it just how you said it then. We're having to reevaluate the level of support that we give to the neighborhood associations, and there will be some changes. Just make it that simple.
Yep.
Anything for you? Okay. Thank you.
All right.
This looks good.
Fantastic. Well, then the only other thing I will share is, as I mentioned before, we'll be bringing some of these things back to the January Neighborhood Association chair meeting for their input before it would come back to this group for final consideration. So any other questions for me?
So this is, then it will be the next council after January that takes this up.
Yes, that's right. And that's mostly due to when those neighborhood association chair meetings take place, the timing of those. So the next one that we're able to get to or the next one coming up is that January meeting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I do think it would be awesome to be able to provide information about the school district at that meeting in January so that we can tell them we've checked and.
Irma's already gotten that out to the neighborhoods. They're
Oh,
aware
good.
of it. They
Okay.
should be aware of it.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
they know that information. That's been an active topic of conversation at the quarterly chairs meeting. I just can't remember what the number is off the top of my head.
I have a quick question about maybe something else we could include in this, and that is what the neighborhood association's expectations are for their counselors or for other city staff that are coming to their meetings. I know that there are some counselors that have tons of neighborhood associations that they go to, or let me say that differently. There are some neighborhood associations that have multiple counselors that are representing them, and they have multiple counselors that go to each of their meetings. And then you have others that just have one. And I know that there are police officers that try and get there, but don't always get there. So just wondering if we needed to include anything in there about expectations for, Chris is saying no, about their expectations for city staff or for counselors.
I don't think you can put expectations on elected officials who aren't obligated to comply. I mean, there is kind of an unwritten expectation that you go to your neighborhood meetings or at least communicate with them. My city councilor hasn't been to my neighborhood meeting in her whole time in office, I think maybe once. So I don't know why we would put that expectation out there when there's no means to enforce it.
Yeah, and I think maybe what I was trying to say is to set the what they can, are there, I think a lot of, you're nodding yes, Annie, you understand what I'm trying to say. I think there's some people in the community who set expectations on us. What I'm trying to say is in this, can we clarify that those expectations for elected officials are not necessarily something that can be enforced, but that is a different conversation between a police officer or another city staff that they're expecting to be there.
Yeah, and this came up in the assessment quite strongly, the fact that depending on the neighborhood association, they each carry very different ideas about what they expect from their city council members or from members of staff. At least as part of the assessment conversation, we had discussed really trying to clarify for the city council members that is probably on them to work with their various neighborhood associations or however many they have to set whatever they are able and interested in providing to those. So really having that be a one-to-one relationship between the council member and the neighborhood associations. However, I do think that there's the question that you raise around staff expectations in terms of what other staff members we expect to be showing up at the neighborhood associations. That's one that I think might be a little bit more in scope for some of the things that we could be looking at here, since we're looking at that neighborhood program coordinator role. But within that context, if we go back and take a look to see if there's anything else we want to do on the staff expectation side of things, is there anything that would be beneficial for, I mean, I'm even thinking of the incoming council members, helping them understand sort of what their role is rather than hearing that directly from the neighborhood association? Because I think that that's been one of the areas where there's been issues in the past where a new person shows up, doesn't fully know what the expectations are, and then hear from a very active neighborhood association saying you must do X, Y, and Z, and kind of feel a little boxed in that setting. So I'm curious if there's anything that would be beneficial on the council side.
Any thoughts?
I mean, I've only been to like 3 or 4 neighborhood association meetings, but usually they have like a point on the agenda where there's an opportunity for somewhat of an expectation for the city councilor to do like a 5 to 10 minute, recap of city events. So that's pretty consistent that happens in most meetings. So maybe just in the onboarding process, maybe tell the counselors that they have the option to go to those. And if they do, they might be encouraged or have the option to expectation to, do a quick recap of current events. But yeah, we're volunteers and I don't think we can be compelled to go to these meetings. I also think that there's an opportunity in this process in terms of communication to say that like, we cannot guarantee that police will consistently be able to come. I mean, I think in a perfect world where we had a more, appropriate staffing levels and funding levels, then I would like to see that happen, near 100% of the time and have backups in place if somebody couldn't because they're doing something or were sick, busy on leave, that someone else could fill in for them. But I don't think that's realistic. And I think that we just have to say that as, concisely and, reality-based as possible. Like we are constrained with the ability of meet those additional hours.
Yeah, that was.
I'm sorry, I just thought of a quick question. Do like police, are they on the clock when they go to these meetings or is it volunteer?
I believe they're on.
Okay, I was just checking in. I didn't know.
So represented employees are always paid when they're working. There are lieutenants and deputy chiefs who would sometimes attend after hours. They are salaried. So they are getting paid
Okay.
as well, but they're not getting paid additional compensation to go.
I mean, thank you for that distinction. I think it helps me understand the situation. Like it's a little bit complicated depending on, what level of leadership they have. But like, yeah, I mean, it's just, ugh.
I think this is one of the reasons why I brought this up, because I'm not entirely sure we're gonna be able to have, I don't know what the staffing levels look like if we have cuts to the police department. If this is maybe one of those things that has to give, but I just wanna put that out there.
But it doesn't just affect police. I mean, at our neighborhood, almost every neighborhood association meeting, there's someone from city staff in attendance, giving some presentation on something. So what was going through my brain was, would there be a way to like do a YouTube video or something that could be shown? I don't know, just to cut down on the amount of staff involvement. I just feel like we ask a lot of city staff.
I can see it now. In 10 years, people will be like, yeah, you should have come to neighborhood association meetings 10 years ago. They used to come in person. That's sad. Sad. Yeah,
I do
something
think that-
to think about.
Yeah, and I think that that's really helpful because we've been mostly thinking about the neighborhood program coordinator role, but I think holistically, this would be also an opportunity to communicate that there may be some additional changes in terms of the staff in general and how they're able to come and attend these meetings. So I think that that's really, really helpful. We'll absolutely add that in and see what pieces of that we can bring forward to them in January.
I have like a high level question. Like Irma is staying on, like she's still doing what she does, but like she's being asked to do more than any one human could. When we talk about the neighborhood leader program person, are we talking, is that another word for Irma?
Yes.
Or okay, so that position is remaining, but we're trying to communicate that there are limitations to what one person can do, and there's not support, to do more than what she's currently doing. Is that correct? Okay.
Yep.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that like my comment, like having that solidified, thank you for the clarification, would be that when we have things like in the earlier slides, timely communication with staff on meetings and roster updates, that then there should be more flexibility for all parties involved. And I don't know if this is like quarterly, or bi-monthly, because like if staff can't get through the submissions of work, because they're one person, then why would the neighborhood have to do it on a more frequent basis?
I should clarify, those are less about it's not changing anything about the frequency. It's just saying that the neighborhood associations themselves need to lead that part of the work, because right now some of them are relying on IRMA's role to accomplish some of those pieces. And so this would just be clarifying, we're not changing the frequency, not changing any of that, but just saying the neighborhood associations need to really carry that forward so that we can take some of that off of that neighborhood coordinator role.
And I guess this is where I do have follow-up questions, because I don't know, like I might be operating in and not, like I don't know what standard work is. Like I thought I knew what standard work is, but I probably don't. So it feels like that there's an expectation that like monthly meetings be submitted like roughly every month, and that the deadline is therefore, about within a month. I don't know if those are rules that are like state driven or if they're local inside of our charters, or I don't know how they're set, but like if you have a public meeting, you're probably supposed to post your agenda in some fashion. So I just want to make sure that it's realistic. I want to make sure there's not constraints either in current standard work or in future work that is not realistic.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's one thing that we can do between now and those January meetings as well, is we are going to work with staff on establishing what staff think are reasonable timelines, and then bring that more specifically. So if that's a 2-week turnaround time, for example, that's something we'll discuss with the neighborhood association chairs in January to get their input on it as well.
I have another, it's still on the same topic, but like, how do we make it like clearly communicate what staff need to make it as simple as possible? Because I feel like that there's some miscommunication there on like what they need. I mean, is there a way that like a volunteer could just plug it into a form that makes it easy to import and upload to like the city website? I mean, I assume we don't want or can't or don't have, we don't give these volunteers access to like modify our website, do we? So given that they don't have, given that we don't have access, that they can't directly access our website and do the volunteer work themselves, how do we make that as streamlined as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question that I can definitely bring back to staff and see if there's options there. I'm not sure how they're currently submitted, if there's a form for that already or not, so I can find out.
Because the expectation here is, oh my gosh, they haven't done this for the neighborhood, so why would we trust them to do anything? And it's like, that's one person for 17 groups.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody else have any questions or things you want to bring forward? Okay, Annie, you got what you need?
I sure did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye. Bye, Chris.